Cloud. Okay, so hello everyone. This is IPython/Jupyter dev meeting for November 14th. We're trying Zoom this week, so if something is wrong, send us a message to say that something is wrong. Otherwise, we probably won't notice on the video that it's not working well. We hadn't had any meeting last week, so we have about 2 weeks to cram into one meeting, but it should be fine. Let's start with Jupyter Lab. Steve and Darian, do you have things to say?
Sure. We released 0.29 last week, which includes a long requested feature that we had originally of being able to break a cell out into its own view. So now you can right-click on a cell and create a new widget that is just viewing that one particular cell. Also including that release is we switched over to React as our virtual DOM implementation. That allowed us to bring in the JSON table renderer or tree renderer and the VDOM renderer, thanks to Kyle for the VDOM library that backs that, so you can render virtual DOM output. And we now have a standalone cell example that's functional as part of that release as well. And since then, Ian's continued to work on a refactor of the menu structure. Instead of plugins owning their own menu, we have a standard set of menus that you'd see in different applications, and then plugins can give content to that menu as it makes sense. So more standard menu structure coming soon. We are working on, instead of asking the user to bring their own version of NPM, having a local pinned version of Yarn, and all they need is Node 4+ installed in their machine, and we will provide the package manager. So that will help with reproducibility. Yarn itself helps with reproducibility with the yarn.lock file, and it's got some other features that we're hoping to take advantage of as well. And Darian is working on settings, the ability to add settings with comments, and what came out of that is, Darian, if you want to talk to that, it makes more sense.
Sure, yeah. So we have this notion of a data connector, which is just kind of an arbitrary provider for really simple sort of APIs that just fetches and saves and removes entities from, say, a REST service or whatever. And we use that in a few spots. We use that for people who want to give their own backend to a setting registry, for example, instead of using ours, and other things where you might want to swap out where the data comes from, but use our actual front end on top of that. And so right now, because the setting editor does validation of whether you inputted data that matches the JSON schema for that particular extensions set of settings, we wanted to have a place to show that, and since the natural place to show things like that is the inspector now, when you create one, accepts a data connector, so that in addition to notebooks and consoles having inspector capability where they talk to the kernel, you could also just write your own connector and put arbitrary data in the inspector. So that's what the setting editor does. And while I was doing that, I saw that the same thing could be applied to other places. And Steve reminded me of this thing that is longstanding as a feature parity issue, which is tokenized completion. So right now, our completer only works if there's a kernel connection and the server answers, but now the completer accepts a data connector, so you could arbitrarily write your own, which means you could write a fairly trivial data connector that takes the tokenized text of any buffer and offers that up for completion. And you don't have to write your own completer implementation, you just have to basically write one function. So that'll just make it easier to take basically bits that we currently have that other people might have more interesting ways to populate, and make it easy to populate without having to subclass them yourself. That's it, that's all I got.
Okay, great, thank you. So apparently some people have to join the Zoom meeting. Thomas is trying to Zoom, but to connect to Zoom, but it says that the meeting has not started yet. So we should see him in a few minutes, likely. So next is Jason, but Jason has nothing written on the Dropbox paper. Jason, are you around?
I can give a quick update on IPyWidgets.
Okay, thank you.
We are working towards stabilizing the Jupyter widgets as they're used in Jupyter Lab. And so part of that was moving the application token into the base widgets package. It's a generic token. It could be used in other contexts. So that made sense. And that means that third-party widgets don't need to rely on an implementation of the widgets manager. So they can remain static and stable, and then the widgets manager that provides the widgets can move independently of that. So that's coming soon.
Thank you. Next in the list is NBConvert. Are you on the call today?
He's actually not feeling well, so he's not here today.
Okay, so let's. I was just thinking of maybe releasing NBConvert 5.4 soon. I'm guessing he's going to talk about that next week. Peter?
Sure. So I think the only thing worth mentioning is kernel gateway 202. We cut a release. It had a pull request from someone about making the kernel manager configurable, and then it had another pull request to make it compatible with Notebook 5.2. I think if I remember correctly, it was a JSON decorator change in Notebook 5.2. Kernel gateway had to adjust. Other than that, there's been various bug reports, pull request issues on Docker stacks. And I haven't triaged MVViewer in a while, so I think there's a few waiting there as well. That's it.
Yeah, the one thing at the intersection of NBViewer and widgets, we're trying to get an approach forward that will let us show widgets from both the 6.0 line and the 7.0 line, and that's opened up the broader conversation of whether all the other MIME types and how we're going to be able to show those. So there's probably some real work that has to go in there in terms of how a MIME renderer an author of a MIME renderer can communicate with NBViewer and get their MIME type renderable in up on the site. But no code yet there.
Okay, thank you. So next is Jupyter Hub Binder.
Yeah, a few bits of progress on Jupyter Hub and Binder. We have patch release of Jupyter Hub, largely in preparation for a significant release of the Jupyter Hub Helm chart, which is what we're using various places at Berkeley and on Binder, and then a lot of work going on Binder as we get ramped up there. But nothing too specific, I think.
Min, I don't know if this question is kind of for the Jupyter Hub people. Do you guys think that the Binder 2.0 information would be useful to share in the NumFocus newsletter? Because we're looking for something to include, and I know that Chris has been working on a blog post detailing updates.
Yes, potentially. That probably makes sense. You have access to the drafts?
Yeah, I have access to the draft, and I was just going to put together like a summarized version of the blog post based on what Chris had already put together, and kind of point to the blog post for the full details.
I think that makes sense, as long as we coordinate the timing and everything appropriately. Yeah, I think that's about it.
Should we move to the next section with Kyle? If he's there, or maybe not. Yes, I see you.
Oh, the spacebar does not work for unmuting. Total muscle memory. Yeah, so on the NRX side of things, I ended up making a bunch of compound components for the notebook. They're a little bit easier to work with and kind of like build an application. Like there was a lot of repetition between different kind of code bases. They're kind of neat to work with, like React components for building stuff. Yeah, I think that's about it from my end. And I accidentally forgot to invite Lucas earlier, so yeah. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Kyle. Also reflex of unmuting me with the spacebar. I think that's it. We have just Thomas, but Thomas can't join. Apparently, it said that the meeting is not happening in the UK for whatever reason. So I'm just going to read these sections. There is basically a pathological performance of for really, really long cells in IPython and the notebook. And Thomas is reworking that, but that might imply some change of API in IPython in some really like deep corner. So maybe not a lot of people are impacted by that. But if you rely on the tokenizer and everything to know how to indent cells, please pitch into the pull request, which is linked in the notes. After, well, I'm not sure there have been new conference and workshop listed since last week.
Can I jump in on this point?
Hmm?
On the subject of the workshop?
Sure, go ahead.
Yeah. So we're organizing a workshop on Jupyter widgets in Paris, Paris greater area. We have run a poll amongst core developers and some of the authors of custom widget libraries. And the dates for the workshop will be from, let me make a mistake, January 23rd to January 26th, 2018. And the workshop will be held at École Polytechnique, which is about 20 miles south of Paris. And there should be accommodation nearby, either at a hotel or provided by EDF, which is a large company here. Hey, Brian.
Hey, Brian. Go ahead. Sylvain, do you want to make an announcement on the mailing list or something like that to have more people involved, or do you want to keep the meeting?
So I was more thinking of running this like a dev meeting. So it's not a conference that should be open to like the large public, but more to core Jupyter devs and people who have done like a lot of work on the top of widgets. Like mostly I work, in coding week, where there should be a few technical presentations, but mostly people working together.
Okay, thanks. Okay. Does anybody have anything else to add before going through the action items? Actually, they are empty, so there is not much left for this meeting.
I have a question about the governance issue 40. What would we need to do in order to close this issue? Since it seems as if right now there's just been approvals all around on adopting GitHub's conventions for searches for contributor-friendly issues.
Brian, do you want to respond to that?
I would say the issue alone. So I saw this. So right now it's an issue. Is that correct?
Yes, it's an issue in governance, and it's two suggestions. Well, with two related suggestions in your pull request on labeling conventions for issues in Jupyter. That's really it right now, and in terms of a change,
Yeah.
and then to adopt.
I mean, the only time we really need to have formal votes in the governance repo is when we're wanting to merge a pull request.
Okay.
When I get back around to finishing up my pull request, I can incorporate those changes. Or if you want to submit a pull request to my pull request with actually making that change to it, I think that's a good way of proceeding.
Yep. And then with regards to officially adopting it on or organization-wide repos, it's like it's just up to the maintainers to put it through locally. I mean, a number of people have approved of this, you know, but I think there has been no official changes on repos that haven't already started it.
So what you can do, what they would do is open an issue on each repo and say, hey, do you want to change that? So people who have permission on the repo can do it. And if you don't have permission to do it, you just say, hey, I don't have the permission. Can you give me the permission? And I will do it for you.
Okay.
It's just difficult to check all the repository because we have many.
No, of course. I was just wondering what the procedural next steps would be. So it seems as if the next steps are just edit Brian's PR and then just go through some of the major repos and propose the change. I already have highlighted a few labels that might be appropriate for name changes in the PyCon Canada's wiki for their sprint, since I'll probably be helping up with that. But yeah, I think we can probably go on from there.
Okay.
Okay, and I think that's almost about it for the meeting. We just have a list of what had been released last week. So last week we had Jupyter Hub 0.8.1, NBR Session Proxy 0.4.0, NB Server Proxy 0.3.2, Jupyter Lab Hub 0.6.0, Configurable HTTP Proxy 3.1, TMP Authenticator 0.5, and Jupyter Kernel Gateway 2.0.2. Nothing planned for this week, and maybe an NB Convert 5.4 soon. I think that's about it for today, unless someone have something to add and to stop the recording. Once, twice, okay. Goodbye, Internet. See you next week.